Welcome to another episode of Inside American Politics by Skoob, where we dive deep into the stories that shaped America. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're exploring one of the most complex, controversial, and ultimately transformative figures in American history, Malcolm X. Picture this. It's the winter of 1969. College campuses across America are burning with revolutionary fervor. A young black student union leader sits in his dorm room, rereading a book that would change his life forever, the autobiography of Malcolm X. Suddenly, the words that once seemed radical now felt like gospel truth. This wasn't just one student's experience, it was happening everywhere. A generation was awakening to a new kind of black consciousness, and Malcolm X was their prophet. To understand Malcolm X's revolutionary impact on African American politics, we need to start with a story that reads like American mythology, but darker, more brutal, and ultimately more real than any fairy tale. Malcolm's life narrative wasn't just a personal journey, it was the definitive experience of being black in America. His story was familiar to nearly every African American because it contained all the trauma, struggle, and ultimate triumph that defined the black experience in this country. It began in the Midwest, where young Malcolm's father fell victim to the brutalities of the Ku Klux Klan. His mother's mental health deteriorated as she struggled alone to care for their children, leading to her institutionalization. Malcolm, now an orphan, was thrust into a system that had no place for ambitious young black men. He moved to the bustling urban landscapes of Roxbury and Harlem, where survival meant becoming someone else entirely. He transformed into Detroit Red, a pimp, hustler, and criminal involved in drug dealing. This wasn't just rebellion, this was adaptation to a society that offered no legitimate paths to black manhood or prosperity. But here's where Malcolm's story becomes uniquely powerful. His arrest and decade-long prison sentence became not his destruction, but his salvation. Behind bars, he joined the Nation of Islam, radically transforming his life's trajectory. This wasn't just religious conversion, it was intellectual and spiritual rebirth. Upon his release, as Malcolm X, he played a pivotal role in expanding the black Muslim movement, catapulting it from relative obscurity to a formidable national presence. By the time the autobiography of Malcolm X made its debut in November 1965, it swiftly garnered widespread readership, selling millions of copies. By the late 1960s, numerous college courses nationwide incorporated the autobiography into their curricula. But what made Malcolm different from other leaders? What made him the shining black prince that actor Ossie Davis proclaimed when he said, "Malcolm was our manhood"? Malcolm X stood as the foremost prophet of the Black Power generation, articulating unsettling truths with a candor that few dared to match. While Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophies, once revered, began to appear to lack the immediacy and vigor needed for the current socio-political climate, Malcolm X's ideas resonated with the youthful black community navigating societal upheavals. Among working-class black communities, Malcolm X was deeply admired for his straightforward communication and unmatched skill in clarifying complex issues. His signature call to "make it plain" wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a philosophy. He believed that the grassroots black populace would be the architects of a new, revolutionary black history, and they deserved the truth presented in language they could understand and act upon. For young black men, he exemplified the authority and strength they aspired to achieve. A figure of uncompromised bravery in the face of racial injustice, Malcolm X set a powerful precedent for what the African American liberation movement ought to strive for. His message resonated particularly with young black men in impoverished urban settings and in the corridors of America's prisons and jails, where his vision infused both hope and a sense of empowerment. His words carried a weight similar to esteemed scriptures, providing a foundation for debate and ideological exploration. Works like Malcolm X Speaks and By Any Means Necessary, along with his autobiography, were held in high regard, akin to sacred scripts illuminating black identity and pride. Reverently referred to as Saint Malcolm X the Martyr, his legacy set the gold standard for collective blackness. His speeches inspired an entire generation, and students often attempted to mimic his distinct oratory style. Malcolm's ideas were frequently invoked to endorse a range of political, cultural, and religious movements. His birthday, May 19th, was honored as an unofficial national black holiday, and any critique of Malcolm, regardless of its intent or severity, was often met with serious backlash, perceived as a betrayal of the black race's hopes and progress. But how did Malcolm X transition from Muslim minister to national civil rights leader? The answer lies in a single afternoon that would change everything. April 26, 1957, at the heart of Harlem, near the bustling intersection of Lenox Avenue and 125th Street. That day began like any other, but a routine police interaction escalated into an event that would catalyze Malcolm's leadership within the civil rights movement. Two police officers attempted to arrest Reese V. Poe, a black man, after a street altercation. The situation intensified as the officers resorted to using their nightsticks against Poe. Observing this excessive use of force, 3 black men intervened, taking a stand against what they perceived as unjust treatment. Among them were Frankie Lee Potts and 2 members of the Nation of Islam's Temple No. 7, Lipsy Tall and Johnson Hinton. Their protest was direct and defiant. "You're not in Alabama. This is New York." The police didn't appreciate this challenge to their authority. Johnson Hinton was arrested, and a violent altercation ensued, resulting in severe blows to Hinton's face and head. These strikes led to significant injuries, including scalp lacerations, a brain contusion, and subdural hemorrhaging. When word reached the Nation of Islam's nearby restaurant, everything changed. As dusk fell, Malcolm X, accompanied by a small group of Nation of Islam members, approached the 28th Precinct station house, demanding access to their fellow member. Initially, the duty officer adamantly denied the presence of any detained Muslims. But something remarkable was happening on the streets of Harlem. The gathering crowd of frustrated residents swelled to approximately 500 people. The police, recognizing they were facing something unprecedented, reconsidered and permitted Malcolm to have a brief conversation with Hinton. What Malcolm found was devastating. Despite his pain and disorientation, Hinton detailed further assault he had endured at the station house. When he had attempted to pray, an officer struck him violently with a nightstick. Recognizing the severity of Hinton's condition, Malcolm insisted on immediate medical attention. What happened next demonstrated Malcolm's emerging power as a leader. As Hinton was transported to Harlem Hospital, about 100 Muslims marched in formation along Lenox Avenue, a sight that left a profound impact on Harlem's busiest street. As medical personnel attended to Hinton's injuries, the crowd outside the hospital swelled to an alarming 2,000 people. The scale of the demonstration alarmed the New York Police Department, prompting them to call for reinforcements. But when Hinton was released from the hospital back into police custody, the protesters' anger intensified. Their march back to the station house took place along West 125th Street, and by now, over 4,000 people were amassed in front of the precinct. Then came the moment that established Malcolm X as a force to be reckoned with in civil rights leadership. With midnight long past, Malcolm made his entrance into the station house with attorney Charles J. Beavers. As the stalemate persisted into the early hours, with thousands of irate Harlemites still lingering outside, Malcolm seized the moment to assert his influence. In a display of calculated leadership that would become legendary, he stepped outside and gave a simple signal to his Fruit of Islam contingent. Following this silent cue, the FOI promptly dispersed. The broader assembly of Harlem residents following the FOI's lead also dispersed rapidly, diffusing what could have been a catastrophic confrontation. This demonstration of leadership, the ability to command thousands with a simple gesture, marked Malcolm X's emergence as a prominent national civil rights figure. As Malcolm X rose to prominence as a minister within the Nation of Islam, he began to discern the constraints of his religious-based message when applied to the political landscape. This tension would drive one of the most remarkable intellectual evolutions in American history. During the early years of his ministry, Malcolm's political views were influenced heavily by the apolitical stance of the NOI. The Nation of Islam, under Elijah Muhammad's leadership, emphasized the power of spiritual transformation over political or social activism as a means to achieve racial equality. Malcolm was careful to frame his speeches as representations of Elijah Muhammad's teachings, avoiding alignment with black radicalism or secular political ideologies. This adherence wasn't just organizational loyalty. Malcolm genuinely believed in the superiority of religious conversion to Elijah Muhammad's teachings as a path to racial advancement. His accounts from this period reveal minimal engagement with political concepts. Even during his time in 1940s New York, a hotbed of leftist activity, his contact with radical ideas was largely incidental. In the role of a Muslim minister, Malcolm's foremost objective was presenting Elijah Muhammad's religious ideas and growing the NOI's membership. As a fervent adherent to Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm often saw civil rights leaders as rivals, portraying Muhammad as the ultimate emancipator and truth-bearer. But here's where Malcolm's story becomes fascinating. His very success began to expose the limitations of his position. While declaring that the Nation of Islam authentically embodied the aspirations of black Americans, Malcolm encountered the burgeoning Southern civil rights movement, prompting him to reconsider his relationship to the struggle for black rights. During the early 1960s, the heightened visibility of black militancy was largely spearheaded by civil rights organizations that Malcolm had often criticized for their integrationist aspirations. However, rather than dismissing these movements entirely, Malcolm's more developed views eventually began fusing his earlier beliefs with new insights gleaned from the burgeoning black protest movements. The Southern movement, expanding into a national crusade for freedom, fostered a newly vibrant racial consciousness. Those engaged in groundbreaking mobilizations in 1963 and 1964 found Malcolm X's ideological evolution harmonizing with their own experiential insights from the ongoing struggle. This evolution would set the stage for Malcolm's most dramatic transformation, his break from the Nation of Islam and his pilgrimage to Mecca. If you want to understand the true power of travel to expand consciousness, look no further than Malcolm X's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964. This journey didn't just change his religious beliefs, it fundamentally altered his understanding of race, humanity, and the possibilities for social change. On April 23, 1964, FBI agents monitoring Malcolm X witnessed something unprecedented. The man who had spent years preaching about white devils was now speaking about encountering white individuals who had converted to Islam, recognizing them as good people. During a debate on the Negro Revolt in Chicago, Malcolm expressed a shift in his perspective regarding white individuals since returning from Africa. This wasn't just political posturing. On Cup's show, a television panel discussion, Malcolm X expressed that he opposed racism and acknowledged that numerous white Americans were equally dissatisfied with the racist mentality prevalent in American policy. He credited his pilgrimage to Mecca for this evolved belief and indicated that many whites were willing to join a genuine fight for the cause of black people. By June 9, 1964, when Malcolm appeared on the Mike Wallace news program, the transformation was complete. Malcolm conveyed that many white Americans were disillusioned by the mistreatment of black people and attested to the presence of good white people. When interviewer Mike Wallace mentioned how these statements contrasted with Malcolm X's previous teachings, Malcolm made a crucial distinction. He was now speaking for himself, differentiating his current views from past anti-white statements made while representing the Nation of Islam. But this evolution wasn't just about race relations, it was about expanding his entire political framework. On June 8, 1964, during the Barry Gray Show, Malcolm demonstrated his increasingly sophisticated political analysis. He saw no difference between Alabama Governor George Wallace and President Johnson regarding racial issues, except in their approaches. He described the U.S. government as inherently racist, citing the predominance of Southern congressmen in leading all congressional committees. Perhaps most significantly, Malcolm began connecting American racism to international politics. He recounted interactions with ambassadors from Cuba and Communist China while in Ghana, where he openly informed them that racial discrimination in America was state-sponsored. By June 25, 1964, on The Bob Kennedy Show, Malcolm articulated his most mature political position. He characterized the civil rights struggle as fundamentally a battle for human rights. When asked about the militancy of his new organization, Malcolm asserted that Black Americans were justified in seeking freedom by any means necessary, but with a crucial caveat: any action taken should be intelligent, just, and legal. This statement encapsulated his evolving approach to the civil rights movement, emphasizing a thoughtful and lawful pursuit of justice while maintaining the revolutionary spirit that had always defined his message. While Martin Luther King Jr.'s Nobel Prize brought global attention to civil rights and racial justice, Malcolm X was engaged in his own distinctive form of diplomacy in Africa, one that was far more radical and potentially more threatening to American interests. Malcolm's vision was audacious. He wanted to encourage African leaders to charge the United States with human rights violations against African Americans at the United Nations. His stance was clear and bold when he told reporters that African American issues should be just as significant as those of South Africa, Angola, or Southern Rhodesia at the UN. Upon arriving in Cairo, Malcolm X took on the role of an unofficial prime minister for Black America. He was filled with confidence, believing that he represented the majority of Black Americans, whom he referred to as field Negroes. His mission in Africa was to form alliances, gather financial support, and establish supportive Pan-African coalitions for the 22 million Black Americans, whom Malcolm saw as crucial political leverage. At the Organization of African Unity Conference in Cairo, Malcolm advocated for African nations to back his emerging organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. This appeal was made despite the risk of alienating American authorities, a risk that Malcolm was willing to take. The American establishment was not amused. The New York Journal-American labeled Malcolm as a pawn in a larger communist agenda and highlighted his controversial depiction of the U.S. as a national torture chamber regarding racial issues. When reporters questioned his presence in Cairo, Malcolm's response was characteristically defiant. "I have as much right to be an observer from an oppressed area as they white reporters have." Malcolm's memorandum, hand-delivered in Cairo, offered a revised narrative on Pan-Africanism that was both sophisticated and damning. The document summarized U.S. racial issues in stark terms. During the past 10 years, the entire world has witnessed our men, women, and children being attacked and bitten by vicious police dogs, brutally beaten by police clubs, and washed down the sewers by high-pressure water hoses that would rip the clothes from our bodies and the flesh from our limbs. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was strategic framing. Malcolm argued that America's racial crisis wasn't merely a domestic civil rights issue. It was part of a greater global human rights crisis. Instead of prophesying America's downfall through religious predictions as the Nation of Islam had done, Malcolm openly implored African leaders to support a United Nations investigation into human rights abuses against Black Americans. U.S. State Department officials were genuinely anxious about the repercussions of Malcolm's independent diplomacy. They investigated rumors of Saudi Arabian financial backing and were ultimately relieved that no African nations openly supported the OAAU's agenda. However, their relief may have been premature. Despite formal diplomatic constraints, Malcolm's diary reveals his success in building bridges of communication, understanding, and cooperation between Africans and Afro-Americans. The journey was pivotal in building robust connections with a significant group of African and Third World activists, intellectuals, grassroots leaders, and organizers, galvanizing support for the broader cause of Black human rights advocacy. Even when he didn't achieve his immediate diplomatic goals, Malcolm succeeded in something potentially more powerful: internationalizing the struggle for Black freedom and connecting it to global movements for human rights and decolonization. Malcolm X's life was a journey from street hustler to revolutionary, from minister to international human rights advocate. He challenged America to rethink race, power, and justice, and his influence still reverberates today. But there's more to his story than most know. Behind his public speeches and iconic image lies a transformation that few fully understand, one that reshaped an entire generation. Download the Skoob app now to access the full story and uncover the moments that turned Malcolm X into a symbol of courage, truth, and radical change. Thanks for listening to Inside American Politics. Keep questioning, keep growing, and, as Malcolm said, make it plain.